I woke up feeling great. The birds are in the trees. They're singing me a melody. La 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 la, fuck the police. My head is on straight. My heart is in peace. My soul is incredibly ready to change history. It's a good day to fight the system. To fight the system. It's a good, good day. It's a good day. We're never gonna stop. We're gonna make it count. When one of us is tired out, the other one will hold it down. We're gonna spread the love. We're gonna spread it around. We're all over the city now, and way down in the underground. Come on. To fight the system. To fight the system. It's a good, day. It's a good, day. To fight the system. To fight the system. To fight the system, to fight the system. It's a good, good, good day. It's a good, good, good day.
The music cut off. Are we getting started? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Rubin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the organizing director of B Seattle. Tonight's Building Tenant Power is just a review of 2023 and a preview of the tenant organizing work to be done in 2024. I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. We are on the land of the Coast Salish peoples. I would like to recognize we are occupying the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. As we do this important work on these lands, we understand that our collective liberation cannot happen without Indigenous sovereignty. We encourage each of you to sign the petition for federal recognition of the Duwamish tribe, and if you're able, visit the Longhouse and pay rent to the Duwamish. You can learn more from Real Rent Duwamish. We'll include a link for them in the resource guide that will be sent after the presentation, and we'll also drop a copy of that in the chat. Our resource guide also contains contact information for the Renting in Seattle helpline, the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, also known as SDCI. They're responsible for enforcing landlord-tenant laws, and the contact information for the Seattle Office for Civil Rights, as well as a bunch of other organizations that provide services to renters. We encourage you to get involved with B Seattle. We're seeking folks to sit at tables and chat with renters, folks to join our board, and folks to join our 2 renter councils. We have the Seattle Renter Organizing Council and the Elder Renter Council. These councils were created for renters to work together to strategize and fight for the renter protections that they feel are important to their communities, to give and receive peer-to-peer support for folks organizing in their buildings, grow renter power, and build community. We will drop links to sign up for the email lists in the chat. And now I'm going to hand things off to my co-director, Tanya Moore, to share some upcoming events before we get into the meat of the workshop. Take it away, Tanya.
Sorry, my computer is doing weird things. So our announcements today, there's things going on in the community in the next month and a half. Wednesday, January 3rd from 6 to 7. I apologize. Stop, Trump. Wednesday, January 3rd from 6 to 7 p.m. on Zoom is 350 Seattle Civic Action Team Campaign Launch Party. Join 350 Seattle for the kickoff celebration of their annual 350 Washington Civic Action Team Legislation Campaign. Get connected to all the tools and resources you'll need for taking action on sound and just climate policy with us for the 2024 Washington State Legislative Session. Each year, 350 Seattle provides simple and accessible tools that folks, sorry, Howard, that folks can use across the state to make their voices heard in Olympia. And we are building grassroots momentum for their climate policies we need. You can register for 350 Seattle's Civic Action Team Campaign Kickoff at the link that's going to be put in the chat. On Wednesday, January 10th from 3 to 4:45 p.m. online, Solid Grounds Rent Smart webinar, general tenant information will be available and talked about. Solid Ground will be discussing tenants' rights and procedures under the Washington State Residential Landlord Tenant Act. Learn how to make a formal repair request and when you can break your lease. A visiting attorney from the Tenant Law Center will also be on hand to help with answering questions. On Thursday, January 11th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at El Centro de la Raza in room 311, which is the Digital Literacy Lab, or online via Zoom, the Seattle Renter Organizing Council meeting. Join us for the first SROC meeting of the new year, where we will be forming our 2024 organizing priorities and working on formalizing our decision-making procedures. Wednesday, January 17th, the Seattle Housing Authority reopens its Section 8 housing choice voucher waitlist. There are important changes to how the process works this year, so we recommend you visit their website for more details and how to apply. On Wednesday, January 17th from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. in person, location to still be determined, and online via Zoom, the Elder Renter Council. On Tuesday, January 23rd from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. online via Zoom, the Rapp King County Regional Call. The aim of the Resident Action Project is to build a statewide network of people who are directly impacted by housing and homelessness issues, who are leading the charge for social change, gain organizing, advocacy, and policy skills by attending RAP's monthly regional Zoom meetings on the fourth Tuesday of every month at 5:30 p.m. Wednesday, January 24th, from 6 to 8 p.m., the Seattle's first Building Tenant Power Workshop of the year, Demystifying Housing Choice Vouchers, formerly known as Section 8. As we noted earlier, the Seattle Housing Authority Housing Choice Voucher waitlist reopens on January 17th with some big changes to how the application and waitlist process work. Join us for this informative workshop on the inner workings and history of housing choice vouchers in Seattle. On Tuesday, January 30th, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., the Washington Center for the Performing Arts and State Capitol Campus in Olympia, the Washington Low-Income Housing Alliance's Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day 2024. Each year, hundreds of advocates across the state unite to meet with lawmakers from the 49 legislative districts to share their experience, expertise around the needs for stronger tenant protections, funding truly affordable homes, and solutions to prevent homelessness. Build people power with advocates in your district and throughout the state. Share your story with lawmakers and other stakeholders. Develop and strengthen your advocacy skills through attending workshops, and take action around this year's bold legislative agenda by registering today. On Wednesday, February 4th, online from 3 to 4:45 p.m., Solid Grounds Rent Smart webinar, Housing Search Part 2, Overcoming Barriers to Housing. Solid Ground will be discussing overcoming barriers that prevent tenants from successfully getting into rental housing, including credit information, evictions, and orders of limited dissemination, dealing with past debt, criminal history, and landlord discrimination. So that's it for the next month and a couple of weeks that we found. I'm now going to pass it back over to Kate to get us going, who will be our narrator through the year in review.
Thank you, Tanya. Within the city of Seattle and the state of Washington, there were some major wins for renters, and there were a few disappointments. Be Seattle and organizations like the Transit Riders Union, House Our Neighbors, Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, Tenants Union of Washington State, and so many more worked really hard this year to bring the voice of renters in Seattle and statewide to the forefront and make sure that our voices were heard on important issues. The Stay Housed, Stay Healthy Coalition spearheaded another significant win for renters' rights this year. In April, Seattle joined the cities of Auburn and Burien by passing Council Bill 120541, sponsored by Councilmember Sawant, which capped late rent fees at $10 per month. This legislation also bans the insidious practice of notice delivery fees. If you haven't heard of those, the relatively new fees that landlords have begun tacking onto late fees, essentially charging tenants for the privilege of having a piece of paper put on their door indicating that they've fallen behind on rent. So these arbitrary charges not only push tenants further into financial turmoil, they also strained their credit scores and hindered their ability to secure future housing. So this victory was driven by the concerted efforts of renters who, mobilized by the coalition, inundated Seattle City Council with thousands of emails and voiced their concerns during council meetings. These efforts swayed Councilmember Lewis, who initially voted for a watered-down amendment and led to a veto-proof vote of 7-2 in full council. So this comes as a massive relief for renters, some of whom were facing fees as high as $500, making it nearly impossible to get caught back up after falling behind. Okay. And then in 2021, only 5 fines were issued from the 3,285 complaints and questions filed by renters with the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, SDCI, 0.15% of the total. This highlights a substantial contrast between the hardships experienced by renters and the repercussions experienced by landlords. This year, the Seattle Renter Organizing Council, also known as SROC, began organizing for an Office of Rental Housing Standards that would protect renters' rights to safe housing and justice through comprehensive investigations and robust enforcement mechanisms. I'm going to hand the mic off to the SROC member who brought this idea to the group, Dr. Howard Gale, sorry, Howard, to share more. Take it away, Howard.
Uh-oh, I gotta find the unmute. Okay. So I think we if my memory serves, it was March, we kind of put forth the idea, and then it was in meetings in May and June that this kind of moved forward. But let me back up a second. I think in 1968, the US passed the Fair Housing Act, which then most states and cities adopted their version, usually strengthening it. So we're talking about 55 years of making discrimination in housing illegal. And yet every time the Office of Civil Rights does a housing challenge where they send people out from various protected groups to see how they're dealt with in trying to get a rental housing. I think the last time they did this a few years ago, it was something like 80% discrimination. After 55 years, a half a century. So the lesson from this, one cynical lesson could be that laws don't work. But the real lesson is if you don't have enforcement of laws, they never work, right? I mean, if we had speed limits, but no one ever got tickets, we all know what we would be doing. Um, so the idea for the Office of Rental Housing Standards came out of the existence of the Office of Labor Standards, which I don't know if people read, but just like 3 weeks ago, they announced another third of $1 million they clawed back from evil evil merchants, evil restaurant owners, who short their workers money. So the Office of Labor Standards has done an incredible job, actually going after malefactors, people that misbehave and abuse their workers. So I think the same idea for the Office of Rental Housing Standards is to have an agency group that actually pursues fines, and in the service of collecting those fines would be willing to pursue litigation, something which SDCI has never done. So that was the concept. And I'll just read, I don't know if Kate wants to put up, do you have the budget action there? But I'll just read it's not very long, and I'll just read the parts of the budget action, which was put into the budget in November. So it asks for SDCI to convene a tenant work group. Okay, what does that mean? A tenant work group. It defines it as 3 renters appointed by the Seattle Renters Commission, 2 eviction defense attorneys, and 2 tenant organizers. So it's a very clear group that has renters' interests at heart. So in trying to get this set up, there were huge fights to not have what are commonly called stakeholders. Like, let's have landlords, let's have renters, let's have everyone at the table. This is really about protecting renters' rights. So the work group will consist of those people, 2 eviction defense attorneys, 3 renters, and 2 tenant organizers, to form to be the work group to help offer legislation to enforce current laws and establish new laws to protect renters, and evaluate new standards related to renters. So this group will be putting forth possible legislation that will help create an office to enforce current renter protections, investigate tenant complaints and needs for additional renter protections. And this work is all supposed to be done by June 1st, the first half of 2024. So it's a very ambitious project. Now, the only other thing I'll say about this, how much time do I have, Kate?
Another 5 minutes or so.
Oh, okay. I don't really need that. But so the only thing I'll point out, for years, the model, and it's not just for renters' rights, it's for any rights, it's for workers' rights, it's for civil rights, whatever, to protect us against police brutality. The only model we've had is to sort of beseech our overlords to give us crumbs. And we ask for a loaf of bread, and we get a half a loaf or a third of a loaf or crumbs. And then we settle for that. And then at their discretion, they can actually claw all of that back later or not enforce it. So I think the model that we're offering here is one that creates an office that'll have permanency, like the Office of Labor Standards. It's an office that's driven by the grassroots, by people that are renters that represent over 50% of the city. And so the promise of this office is not in creating some magic formula and having this office. The promise is going to be in the work that we put into building it and safeguarding it. And so I'll just say briefly, I think one element of safeguarding it is going to be, like, I would envisage that for this office to really be productive, and fulfill its promise, it's going to have to maybe once or twice a year convene renters in Seattle to really find out what renters want. It has to be somehow tied organically to the people whose interests it's serving. So this is something we're going to have to fight for. And I do think ultimately, again, since we usually ask for crumbs and get half the crumbs we request, I think especially with this city council, I think, realistically, we're probably talking about having an initiative, which is something that I think is good, because, asking our overlords for friendly legislation is something that can be taken away. Asking, getting initiative, things that are done through an initiative process, it's much harder for politicians to claw that back. And, I think the best evidence for that is people that know and are familiar with the 50-year history of Washington State's most progressive Open Meetings Act and Public Records Law, know that there's been repeated assaults on that, but it's held pretty firm, and it's one of the best in the country. So, and that was created not through legislation. That was a citizens' initiative in Washington State. So, again, I think one more thing. Okay, I'm almost at 6 minutes here, but the other thing I want to reinforce is, again, not to deride other wins we've had, but we can fight over individual things like lowering punitive fees on late rent and all those things. The whole idea of this office is it will be a place that can sort of agglomerate and take all of those complaints and then strategically think about what legislation is going to serve everyone's needs best. So it's not going to be the piecemeal thing of always fighting for one specific thing. And if you remember during that fight for the late fees, it was like, is it going to be $10? Is it going to be $25? Is it going to be 2%? Is it going to be 3%? I mean, if we have that fight over everything, we're going to be here for decades and not make much progress. So the Office of Rental Housing Standards is a way to sort of make all that possible across a much broader array of issues. And I would be remiss not to say that the way this finally did get into the budget is through the very hard work of Kate, reaching out to other organizations, and also Tanya's work in helping to draft and put together a letter to make this appeal, to get other organizations on board, to reach out to the council offices, and to really bring this to fruition. So again, without this budget amendment actually happening, this would not have been a win. So that's it.
Thank you, Howard. And I also just want to take this opportunity as a call to folks to please consider joining SROC. We're going to need a lot of organizing to make this happen, and this is so important. I don't know if y'all happen to see the article published by Publicola a few weeks ago about the ethical concerns about SDCI, who, full disclosure, we are funded by them, and we think that there are lots of great people who do great work there, but there's just some real problems with tying the landlord the enforcement of landlord-tenant laws to the same department that is responsible for overseeing and permitting construction. You can't serve two masters is essentially what it comes down to. So I just put a link to the article in the chat. Check it out when you have time, and then come to our meetings. Okay, and with that, I have to hop into my script. I was looking at the article again. Oh, awesome. So with that, I actually just want to hand the mic over to Tiffany McCoy. Tiffany is the Policy and Advocacy Director at House Our Neighbors. She's currently the Advocacy Director at Real Change, but will be transitioning over to House Our Neighbors full-time on January 1st. Tiffany was the campaign manager for the Yes on I-135 campaign, which created the first social housing developer in the United States. This was a really, really exciting win for renters. So Tiffany, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Kate and Tanya, and thanks to everyone for having me. And yeah, happy end of the year. And yeah, Howard, it was really nice actually to go after you, because like two of the themes that you were really talking about, the power of the initiative system, and then the clawing back of protections, even if you win them 1 year and then a couple years later there's a new council or there's a new budget crisis, and any of those progressive wins are clawed back. So just to like really pull on those threads and expand upon them, that's exactly the reason why House Our Neighbors, which, just for some background, House Our Neighbors was a coalition that formed under Real Change about 2.5 years ago, first to oppose the Charter Amendment 29, the Compassion Seattle amendment that would have codified encampment sweeps into our city constitution. I mean, arguably they are already pretty codified as like our standard policy, but this would have just put it into our city constitution. But this coalition really has evolved into now like its own organization. And yeah, as Kate said, I'll be leaving Real Change at the end of this month. But through that coalition, we ran an initiative to create a social housing developer in the city of Seattle. And we did it through the initiative system because, as Howard said, we don't want to have like all of this horse trading and this trading off, like, oh, can we have only union built housing, but then that means we can't have really higher environmental standards, or oh, we have like tenant leadership. Okay, well then that means that you don't get, eviction or restorative justice instead of evictions. Like there's always backroom trading that happens when you're working through the legislature. Don't get me wrong though, there's also a lot of ease and power that comes through working through the legislature, as I know you all already know in this room. But yeah, the initiative system is definitely going to be a cornerstone of the House Our Neighbors organization. Just as a refresher, what social housing is and how it's different from what we currently do. Social housing, unlike how we do current housing, that's just my kid, it is permanently affordable. It is publicly owned forever. And it actually has a majority of renters that are going to be governing the board in perpetuity. And yeah, it can't be sold off to private interests for a quick buck. So also, if you make a couple more dollars and you're worried about getting kicked off of like the Seattle Housing Authority voucher system, that is not something that happens in social housing. It is forever housing. You can grow in place. If you make more money, that's great. You don't lose your housing just because of that. You just end up paying a bit more in rent. So this is fundamentally different from anything we do in the country at scale. And we all know that we're in a deep crisis of housing affordability and homelessness. So this was the House Our Neighbors Coalition vision for what could actually in the future prevent not only evictions, but also the pipeline into homelessness and just the displacement of our neighbors. So that passed in a February special election by 14 points. And if you will remember, we were not able to fund the developer. We wanted to, that was our goal, but the Washington State Constitution prohibits public development authorities from having taxing authority. So this was always going to be a two-step process, creating the social housing developer, which again is a renter majority governing board. Each social housing unit will have its own governance council. So there will not only be like that renter power from the top down, there will also be that renter power from the bottom up, where each housing unit, will have its own governance council. But yeah, so now we are going back to the ballot. At the end of January, we will be announcing our next initiative to fund the social housing developer. If the council elections had gone a different way, there was a very cool possibility to like do this through the council or at least have the council put what we draft onto the ballot, so we don't have to do the signature gathering process. But here we are, we're still going forward. And so yeah, we are looking to create the social housing fund through taxing excess compensation that companies pay their employees. So similar to Jumpstart in that it is a payroll tax, but different than Jumpstart in that this is only targeting payrolls over $1 million. And this will actually capture more businesses in the city of Seattle, because if you all remember, Jumpstart only targets the top 2 to 3% of businesses in the city. What we are putting forward would actually put more businesses into having to pay this fee. So potentially wealth management companies that are not big enough to have to pay under Jumpstart, and massive like real estate firms that we all know make a ton of money but aren't in that top 2 to 3%. So the amount we're looking to raise is still very much up in the air, to be honest. It's one of the last outstanding questions. And I know this is a pretty broad range of what we're looking at, but we're looking at between like 30 and 90 million a year, because we want to make a significant dent in the housing crisis in the city, but we also want to make sure that, you know, it's a winnable number, and that we can convince the public that a brand new entity without a track record of success, that doesn't have a proof of concept, which is what the opposition will say, that we can convince voters. We don't think we will have an issue. We're looking at the November 2024 ballot. It'll be a large progressive turnout. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing. And we hope to like have folks support. I know Kate and everyone will support this, and help out wherever you can. Just appreciate everything each of you do. And if you have any questions, I'll pop my email in the chat. But yeah, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And I see Howard actually has a hand raised. Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah, I want to reiterate, because I can't say how important it is what Tiffany said, and partly we got our idea, Tiffany, from the House Our Neighbors Initiative. The fact that foundationally you put renters at the core of the group that was going to initiate the process, being the majority, and then center renters in each of the units that are going to be built. That is so at variance with how things are done. And it's really profound, because it's entrusting that the people that have a stake in this know what they need and what they want, and can really argue for themselves. And that was really at the core of forming this work group, is having renters be the core of it. And again, it's at such gross variance from the stakeholder model, which is the way that politicians and the council have always nibbled away at any gains we get. You know, you have stakeholders. What's amazing is we never have stakeholders when it comes to business interests, right? I mean, business interests are business interests. You know, they bring their bags of money, they have their secret closed door sessions. But when little people want to have a say in how things are done, then we have to have stakeholders. So I do want to, anyway, congratulate How's Our Neighbors and Tiffany, because I think that needs to be repeated a lot. This is something we should replicate in every aspect of social justice, that we really have to have the voices of the people who, you know, have these issues at stake. So thanks. That's it.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to bedtime, Kate, so I'm sorry I have to pop off here.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks all. Happy New Year.
And with that, I would like to introduce our next topic, which is the Services Not Sweeps Coalition. It's a Seattle-based coalition that formed this year with advocates, service providers, community members, and folks with lived experience fighting to ban encampment sweeps. I am going to hand things over to my colleague Dee, who's going to be speaking about the coalition's work. And Dee is also a coalition member. All right, take it away, Dee.
Hey, thanks, Kate. Thank you very much for having me this evening. My name's Dee Powers. My pronouns are they, them. I work with Be Seattle, and I'm a founding member of the National Vehicle Residency Collective. I'm also a former vehicle resident myself, having only been rehoused just under 2 years ago after 7 years in a molding motorhome parked less than 2 miles from my last rented residence. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the Services Not Sweeps Coalition, of which Be Seattle, the National Vehicle Residency Collective, and over 40 other organizations, unions, and mutual aid groups are endorsing this year, as we call for a ban to all winter and extreme weather encampment removals, vehicle home impounds, and other enforcement actions taken against people attempting to survive what the climate chooses to throw at them. We call for the money saved by not sweeping be used for people-first services, including shelter, safe lots, and tons of permanently, deeply affordable housing, of which Seattle does not have nearly enough. The vast majority of sweeps come with no offers of housing, care, or support of any kind. Rather than providing shelter, sweeps often destroy the only shelter people have. In 2022, 82% of the 943 sweeps the city conducted were called obstruction sweeps, which means the city had to give no advance notice, nor any offers of shelter or services. This violent cycle of removals across the city forced people to repeatedly move to new areas, all the while never getting access to the services they need most. And this cycle doesn't stop for the weather. The city of Seattle will conduct encampment evictions and vehicle impounds in the heat, in the smoke, in the rain, in the freezing cold. They have a schedule to keep, and it does not take the safety or health of those affected most into account. According to the list provided to Services Not Sweeps Coalition member organization WHEEL by the King County Medical Examiner's Office, 336 people died on our streets this year alone. In recent months, that rate has averaged over a death a day as our unhoused neighbors attempt to shelter themselves in rapidly worsening weather. Stripped of their most important possessions after repeated encampment removals, stealing away what little they could claim as their own, inadequate services, shelter, and housing are never offered to replace what's been taken away with something, anything better, any offer. But obstruction sweeps mean nothing. It means no offer, no housing, no help. When I lived in my RV in South Seattle, snow and smoke were my two most feared times of year, not to mention the terror of accidentally getting wet in a rainy climate with no way to get dry. Friends would scrape together funds to get me into a hotel for a few days during smoke season when the air quality meter was pushing out of the red and into the purple. But I was lucky. I had friends who could provide me the services I needed to remain safe and healthy, despite the risk of leaving my sole remaining property unmonitored on the streets to be stolen or impounded. Too many people do not have the support structure I had. Too many people are left outside to fend for themselves and then are viciously uprooted during the worst of weather, dumping them and their tiny sanctuaries into the coldest rain imaginable or into shadeless streets on the hottest, haziest days of the year. We can provide this tiny scrap of humanity if we call for it together. We know our unhoused neighbors deserve so much more, but this first step toward a partial halt to sweeps will free up money better spent to care for our friends and neighbors without permanent housing. It seems such a small ask, doesn't it? As we move into the new year, the Services Not Sweeps Coalition is seeking your support to help this project progress and become reality. We're currently seeking volunteers to help us post flyers, to do tabling, to help canvas, as well as looking for artists or designers to help produce graphics and materials for the campaign. We're also looking for service providers, public health workers, and folks with lived experience to help write and sign on to op-eds and press releases. You can contact us at servicesnotsweepscoalition@gmail.com to offer your support for either of these reasons. If you only have a little extra time instead of a lot, please contact City Council. Fill out this form to send an Action Network email demanding that Seattle City Council ban sweeps in the winter and during extreme weather events. Last but not least, we are seeking additional endorsers and coalition members. Are you part of a Seattle or King County-based organization interested in endorsing our campaign or being part of the coalition? Fill out this form to get started. I sincerely hope you all agree with me that this effort is worth the time being put into it. We feel passionately about the humane treatment of our friends living outdoors and in vehicles across the region, and want to give them a chance to actually receive the services they need. You can find our website and more information at www.servicesnotsweepscoalition.org. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Dee. And thank you for hopping in when our first speaker had another engagement. I really appreciate you.
Happy to help. I'm glad I knew the subject matter. I'm glad I've been involved.
Yeah, we can hop on to the next screen. Our next topic is the solidarity budget. They actually put together a really amazing year-end wrap-up that was shared on their Instagram and website. So we're gonna hop in it and share it, because this is also work that is done by and impacting renters. The solidarity budget worked hard this year, and using the 2022 created solidarity budget as a base, it was decided that they would focus on the 9 specific basic guarantees to create safe, affordable communities. While it was an uphill battle and not all gains were realized, there were some wins, including mental health supports. This year, the community won $20 million to improve mental health outcomes for our students, involving culturally specific and responsive programming. Counselors are important for kids in crisis, and it is equally important to invest in programs and services well beyond that to reduce the number of kids in crisis in the first place. This important investment was made possible by a tiny increase to the corporate jumpstart payroll tax. In addition, $200,000 will be invested in mental health resources for frontline community-based first responders. Non-carceral domestic violence response. This year, Community won $450,000 total for 2 programs taking a survivor-led approach to domestic violence that will give survivors the tools and resources needed to make autonomous decisions. Labor protections were made enforceable through scaling up the Office of Labor Standards, also known as OLS. The budget also develops paid time off for domestic workers and allows OLS to provide protections for gig workers who are particularly vulnerable to wage theft. More than $1.6 million in investment in this area are being made next year. Safer streets for the South End. Community won $1.4 million for implementation of accessible Mount Baker and $2 million to calm traffic on South Henderson Street. Both projects will make it safer for kids to get to school, for people to access business districts, and improve street safety in the South End. A raise for all human service workers. Human service workers will be receiving a 2% raise in 2025. While this is better than nothing, we know that nonprofit human service workers face a 37% wage gap compared to workers in non-human service industries. And the City Council passed a resolution this June committing to giving these workers a 7% pay increase at minimum by 2025. You've seen the cost of living go up significantly more than that. So this is barely a win, but we'll take it. And we'll continue to fight for wage equity for nonprofit human service workers in the future. Some of the big losses this year include services were cut to pay for harmful police surveillance. City Council removed funding for services at tiny house villages and non-congregate shelters by $1.5 million in order to let SPD potentially rent spot shooter and CCTV cameras. Acoustic gunshot technology, with or without CCTV, does not reduce gun violence, and many other cities are fighting to end spot shooter contracts, or sorry, shot spotter. I don't know why I'm saying this wrong. Shot spotter contracts after police have killed children, put innocent people in jail because of shot spotter alerts, and been flooded with false alerts from shot spotter. Continued lack of fiscal oversight of SPD. City Council allowed SPD to keep $31 million for positions SPD has no intention of filling, ghost cops, and paid a $4.5 million ransom for SPOG to allow non-police responders and alternate traffic directors to reduce SPD staffing strain. This means that these funds are not available for meaningful public safety measures that reduce violence in communities, such as violence interruption programs, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, affordable housing, and emergency financial assistance. Cutting funding for pedestrian safety and access. City Council approved cuts to the School Safety, Traffic, and Pedestrian Improvement Fund, Vision Zero, and ADA accessibility, and prioritizing 22% of the city sidewalk funding for residential streets for residential streets to enable a sweep of a homeless encampment in Greenwood. Continued funding of deadly sweeps. Forced encampment removals are responsible for 10 to 25% of the death rate of our unhoused neighbors. Failure to address the $218 million budget deficit coming up in 2025. Without passing new progressive revenue sources, we're facing an austerity budget next year with essential city services being on the chopping block and jeopardizing the Jumpstart spending plan, which requires investment in affordable housing, the Green New Deal, the Equitable Development Initiative, and small businesses. This could lead us deeper into a spiral of over-reliance on carceral systems and prevent us from addressing root causes and meeting people's basic needs. As housing justice organizers and an organization that is primarily funded by the city of Seattle, this is concerning for me Seattle directly as well. So we still have work to do. Visit bit.ly/SB recap and get involved to find ways you can get involved in working towards the coalition's guarantees for a base quality of life for everyone. And sometimes when we drop those bit.ly links in the chat, they don't work. So we also have just a direct link to the wrap up as well that we will drop. So before I move on from city level organizing, I also want to know that in August, Seattle City Council voted down a measure sponsored by Councilmember Sawan that would have acted as a trigger law to institute rent control in Seattle if the statewide ban on rent control was ever overturned. So rent control has been illegal in Washington state since 1981, meaning that any city level legislation could only take effect after the state lawmakers lift the ban themselves. So Councilmember Sawan, who is a fierce advocate for renters, has proposed some version of rent control. I think this is the third time, and it still hasn't passed. And this version that she proposed was so strong. It would have been an incredible win for renters had it ever been able to move forward. However, some housing advocates do believe that it was so strong that it may have actually been a hindrance to moving forward, since, as I noted and hate, that we really have to get the state lawmakers to lift the ban themselves. They have to make that choice, and our elected officials have been failing us for a long time in that regard. But we shouldn't lose hope. There are still efforts being made on a statewide level to stabilize rents. So I'm going to divert slightly to discuss one quick statewide legislative win from 2023. And then I will hopefully be handing the mic over to Gian Mitchell with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance to talk more about the Housing Alliance's priorities and their goals for rent stabilization. But we are ahead of schedule. So if Gian isn't here, we might have to hop around a little bit. But first, we'll just talk about this next bill. And it's Washington House Bill 1074, changes to housing providers' ability to withhold security deposits. Since 2019, Columbia Legal Services has worked in close partnership with bill sponsor Representative Ty from District 41 and the Tenants Union of Washington State to bring renters' voices to the legislature and pass these protections. So this law brings clarity, fairness, and transparency to the security deposit dispute process in several ways. It creates a statutory definition of normal wear and tear, so landlords and renters both understand what the landlord is permitted to charge for. It requires landlords to provide documentation substantiating the actual costs of the repair before charging damage to the renter. It prevents landlords from reporting charges to collection agencies, tenant screening services, or other landlords unless those charges are substantiated. And it shortens the amount of time in which a tenant can be sued for amounts exceeding the deposit. This bill gives tenants more power to contest charges that are sent to collections and that prevent them from signing a new lease. We'll drop a link to the media release in the chat. Okay. And I was reading, quick check, is Gian here? Okay. I am not seeing Gian. So there are a couple things that I did want to cover as well, but I think we're actually going to maybe just hop ahead to the action that we're going to take. At every workshop, we try to take an action. And this one comes from the Housing Alliance, which is why I was hoping that Gian would be, oh, Gian is here. Tanya, go ahead and go back to that other slide. Here we go. Gian, you have perfect timing. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry to spring this on you. I know it's like 20 minutes earlier than we told you, but we've been powering through this workshop. So we're just going to hand the mic right over to you. Did you have a slideshow that you wanted to share? We can make you co-host.
Yeah, please make me co-host. I'll share a slideshow real quick.
Okay, and I thought I could make you co-host, but it looks like the host has to do that, which is Tanya. So just give us 1 second.
No problem.
Oh, there you go. Good to go.
Okay, awesome. Let me get this set up real quick. And let's see here. Okay, so thanks for inviting me here, y'all. I'm Gian Mitchell. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Associate with the Housing Alliance. So I'm here today to give a brief overview of our 2024 legislative priorities and then share some ways y'all can get involved. This slide just has some general, like these are direct quotes from tenants and folks who are experiencing the high rent increases and such that a lot of people are currently facing in Washington State. So this is going to be our legislative agenda for this upcoming session, but it's not an exhaustive list of every policy we may end up supporting. We constructed this legislative agenda through a series of listening sessions, meetings with community members, conversations with allies, and then follow up on priorities that we didn't pass last legislative session. So one of our main priorities is going to be backfilling the state and local document recording fee shortfall to prevent cuts to homelessness services. So the state's not currently discussing taking back or reducing funding that's already in place to counties. But the county and the state, they each get a portion of document recording fee revenue, and the county's portion has to be spent on homelessness services. Current projections are that there'll be a shortfall in the county's portion of this revenue. That if it's not backfilled by the state, would result in cuts to homelessness services and to permanent supportive housing. Last legislative session, one of our main priorities was backfilling this anticipated gap. Unfortunately, the Department of Commerce, when they estimated how much money would be required to backfill that gap, their estimate was a little bit off and was too small, essentially. So when we managed to appropriate 57 million last legislative session to backfill that shortfall, it just wasn't enough. And we know right now that homelessness services, affordable housing, like those are all things that there is not enough of currently. So we cannot go backwards. We cannot reduce that or have any kind of cuts to that. That's completely unacceptable. So we're going to be pushing hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll also be working to invest in the frontline workers and nonprofits that provide homelessness and housing services. So I'm sure some of you are well aware, there's a real workforce crisis in human services at the moment. Wages for folks doing this work are insufficient to meet basic needs. Last session, 45.06 million was appropriated to increase funding to homeless and housing grantees for a 6.5% grantee contract increase. This is ongoing. It's intended to address the workforce crisis, but we know a lot more is needed. So we're going to be pushing again this upcoming legislative session to help get some additional funds for those folks. And then one of our very important main priorities for the legislative session this year is going to be preventing excessive rent increases with a reasonable statewide cap. And I'll go into some more exact details on this policy in my next slide. But a little bit of history. Last session, we championed 3 bills that introduced that addressed excessive rent increases. We really made historic progress with those bills. And this year, there's going to be 1 bill with the House and a Senate version led by Senator Trudeau and Representative Alvarado. We're really trying to make sure that this bill is being carefully crafted to ensure that tenants are protected, while also allowing landlords to make enough income to do repairs and make a reasonable profit. And we also just want to recognize that at the Housing Alliance, we know that we're never going to end homelessness without preventing excessive rent increases. Too many of our community members are being displaced and forced into homelessness by landlords who impose an excessive rent increase in pursuit of excessive profits. This is not something that we can just throw money at and attempt to fund our way out of by doing things like implementing policies in which the state pays for missed rent or things like that. There's just not enough money for that when landlords just keep hiking the rent and continuously hiking the rents. So we're going to be focused on providing that reasonable cap to prevent those excessive and predatory rent increases. Another of our priorities is going to be creating a permanent fund source of at least 200 million per year for the Housing Trust Fund. This is going to be for services and for housing for people with disabilities. Last year, we championed House Bill 1628/CHOP. A new version of the bill is going to be introduced and led by Representative Berg this year. This bill is called the Affordable Homes Act, and it's going to create a permanent fund source for the Housing Trust Fund by enacting a new state-level real estate transfer tax on very high-value properties. The tax is going to be tiered, so it can't be avoided by the seller listing the property just under the amount the tax would kick in at. And this bill is going to be a tax break. It's going to be a tax break for most properties in Washington and a 1% tax increase for properties sold for over 3.025 million. So in other words, it'll be a tax increase on the folks who can afford to pay that tax increase. We desperately need to build more affordable housing in our state, and this bill is going to assist with that. Another one of our priorities will be closing the gift card loophole for big retail corporations. This is a bit of a progressive revenue. It may not seem like directly related to housing, but the more we expand the state's pot of money to work from, the more money we have for housing. And we're a member of the Washington Consumer Protection Coalition, and we're going to be supporting this mechanism for progressive revenue. Big Washington corporations like Starbucks, they're currently incentivized to make it hard for consumers to spend their gift cards because they can keep any unspent funds. This bill is going to make it easier for consumers to claim their money, and it's going to put any completely unspent, untouched funds toward the public good instead of executive bonuses and executive profits. All right, so on our next slide, we're going to go over a little more in depth that rent stabilization bill. So some key points. This bill will protect manufactured homeowners and residential tenants. It'll apply to both of them. It'll cap rent increases at 5% every 12 months. Fees will count as rent for the purpose of the increase. So in other words, if someone is to, if a landlord were to raise the rent the 5%, and then try to throw in some additional fees as a way of essentially raising the rent under a different name, they wouldn't be able to do that because that fee would be counted towards that 5% cap. It would also give 6 months notice for all rent increases at 3% or more. That'd be statewide. It would also allow tenants to break the lease and move if rent increases is increased at 3% or more. So if you get that kind of rent increase, that's really making it so that the place you're living is unaffordable, you'll be able to break the lease, leave, and actually have the protections to find more affordable housing, hopefully. It'll also cap late fees at $10 a month, and it'll cap all move-in fees to equivalent of 1 month's rent or less. It's also going to create a landlord resource center that will provide some additional information for landlords and tenants who are looking for information on either landlord's responsibilities or tenants' rights. And then one of the things we're most excited about this bill is that the enforcement is going to come from a private right of action, like a lot of landlord-tenant laws, penalties, and then it's also going to come from enforcement by the state's attorney general's office. We know that, I mean, it's one thing to pass a law, and it's another thing to see that law enforced. And right now, with the private right of action, it's on the tenant to enforce and like work in small claims court to push back against their landlord. And we know that a lot of tenants do not have the capacity to do that, either because they're busy working like 60 hours a week, or because this is just a little too above their pay grade, a little too complicated, and it's just a little too, it's way too confusing, quite frankly. And so by putting that enforcement power in the state's attorney general's office, we're going to have like a government agency that's going to be like focused on actually enforcing this law. And we're really excited about that. We're also acutely aware of the fact that one of the things we're going to be pushing for this session with the rent stabilization bill is the simple fact that there are going to be lawmakers who are going to say that the 5% cap is too low. They're going to say that we need to up it to something more like what Oregon did at 10%. And we're going to be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that that cap stays as low as physically possible. We're really pushing that we can survive on 10% is far too high. And we're saying that because rent increases have been going up for years. And they've reached the point where 5% is still, that could still be like more than $100 a month, which is more than, on a 12-year lease, that's more than an additional $1,200 per year. And if we have a rent increase cap that's at like 10%, with how high rents are currently, that's just going to mean that people are going to be priced out and the law is not going to be actually assisting folks. So we're going to be, again, fighting to make sure that we keep that as low as physically possible. And we'll need all your help to do that. So, Kate, I sent you an email with some links. If you could drop those in the chat now, and if not, I can drop them in the chat too. But so the first link is going to be to a testifier and speaker interest form. So one of the ways that you can get involved, and one of the ways that's really just profoundly important ways you can get involved, is to just fill out this form and indicate ways in which you want to get involved. We're specifically looking for folks who want to share their stories, either to state lawmakers directly, by meeting with them, by testifying at a hearing. The testifying is really pretty simple nowadays. You can do it from the comfort of your own home as long as you have like a camera or even like a phone. And we try to make it as easy and accessible and really remove barriers for folks. We'll walk you through every step of it, and we'll make it as easy as possible. The second link is to folks who've been impacted by a rent increase directly. You can share your experience with us by taking that short survey, and then we'll follow up with you to see if we can get you more involved, and also to see if it's okay if we could share your story on social media or other ways that we can leverage your story and use your story to push for rent stabilization. And that third link is to a website called rentfairness.org. And essentially what this website will let you do is that you can just film on your phone, on your computer, a very brief, very short video on why we need rent stabilization, just telling your story. We take those videos and then we show them to lawmakers. We post them on social media. We use them at events. They're extraordinarily useful and extremely impactful. Of these three things, though, if you're only going to do one thing and you're really interested in getting involved, I would say do that testifier and speaker interest form. Really cannot emphasize that enough because we're looking for testifiers for this upcoming legislative session that starts on January 8th. And the more folks we have with us, the better. We've also got our Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day coming up on Tuesday, January 30th, and I'll drop these links in the chat too. But we're going back to in-person this year, which we're super excited about. And we have some assistance available for folks to either get a little bit of financial assistance to get the transportation. There's also some ways that folks can self-organize carpools. Groups like B Seattle could fill out the group registration form. and come as a group essentially. But this is a lobby day where we set up meetings for you with your lawmaker. And with those meetings, you go in, you've had a bit of preparation done, and we help prep you for it essentially. And you'll go in there and you'll meet with your lawmaker and tell them why you want to support the policies that we're supporting in this legislative session, because you know that tenant protections are so desperately needed right now. And we need to put our money where our mouth is with regards to housing and homelessness services right now. So that's had, again, January 30th will be in person this year. We're super excited for it. That's all I've got. And let me just stop sharing your screen and see if anybody has any questions. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to let me come and talk fast at you for a little bit. Apologies again if you missed anything. I'll drop my email in the chat if anybody has any questions or you want further elaboration on stuff. Feel free to reach out to me. I would be really happy to talk to you. And again, I really just want to emphasize, like, if you want to get involved, fill out that testifier interest form. I or my colleague Poe will follow up with you. And we're really excited to work with folks this legislative session to really push for policies like rent stabilization.
Thank you. And I noted it in the chat that the first lobbying I ever did with B Seattle was like 4 days into when I started, maybe 2 weeks, but it was like brand new. Somebody said that I should go to this, and it was such an easy introduction, and everyone with the Housing Alliance is so nice. So if you are even considering it, I want to say that they make this lobbying like very accessible and low barrier. And so I really, really encourage folks to get involved. And so we always do an action at every workshop. And Gian actually covered it in the chat. We've got the action that you can take. Oh, and that was a picture of me down there from when we were just down in Olympia earlier this year, trying to lobby for rent stability. And I think we can win it this year. So I really, really hope that folks on this call will invite their friends and their neighbors and show up for this, because this is really great. And testifying is pretty easy. And so thank you so much for being here, Gian. And with that, Tanya, if you want to hop into the next slide, I added a little something at the end. So last year was full of some good wins and some hard losses. 2024 looks to be a year when the work of tenant organizations and tenant organizers, they're going to be even more important. So please follow B Seattle on social media. We're at bseattle.org on all platforms. And we'll keep you up to date with what's to come, actions that are needed, and also let you know about any new renter and tenant protections. And we'll also include links to the social media for our other speakers when we send the follow-up email. I don't think we have it in the script. And with that, I want to end this workshop by thanking you all for coming. And I also want to share this poem. It's called The Radical Gratitude Spell, and it's by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's a spell to cast upon meeting a stranger, comrade, or friend working for social and/or environmental justice and liberation. And I'm sharing it. I'm hoping that we can bring the intention of it into 2024. You are a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder in a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination. You have chosen to be free every day as a practice. I can never know the struggles you went through to get here, but I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know I honor the choices you made in solitude, and I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself and your journey to love the particular container of life that is you. You are enough. Your work is enough. You are needed. Your work is sacred. You are here, and I am grateful. And thank you all so much, and I will give you back the rest of your evening.
Thanks, Kate. You have a good evening.
Thank you.